Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, Anshe Chesed in New York City. Today we are recording this on day 152 of the war, praying for the hostages, praying for whatever kind of relief from this anguish that they are experiencing, and praying for Klal Yisrael as usual, joining together to study Torah as a measure of both shaping our thinking, giving us comfort, giving us a little joy during these difficult months. Already 152 days. We are in the fifth month already, having completed 5 months of this. And hoping that this will move into new phases. Thanking everybody for being here with us as we discuss Parashat Vayakhel. This is a Shabbat also with Shabbat Shkalim. We're not going to get too much into that, but Vayakhel, Vayakhel is known by its first word, Vayakhel. And Vayakhel means he got them together. And we can stop there. We could stop on the first word, Vayakhel Moshe. I'm just opening it up to the right page. Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael vayomer alehem. Moses convened the entire community. Edah, congregation, is a modern word. The people of Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer alehem, and he says to them, Ela advarim asher tzivah Adonai lasot otam. These are the things that God has commanded us to do. And then he goes into Sheshet Yamim Taseh Melacha. 6 days you shall work, which is a commandment, I guess. You have to work 6 days. You have to work. Uvayom Hashvi, in the seventh day, Yelachem Kodesh. It will be holy. Shabbat Shabbaton Ladonai. A Sabbath for God. Kol Haoseh Bo Melacha Yumat. Anybody who does any work will be put to death. Lo Tivaru Esh. Do not burn any fire on
almost roteim. That's the key.
In all your dwelling places. But we don't want to talk about that for a second. I just want to spend a moment lingering on the first words, which is Vayakhel Moshe, and they're unusual in this context. And I want to suggest that the idea of congregating people may not necessarily be the point. It may be the issuing of the words, or maybe it is the point. Maybe we are meant to be constructing in our imagination a picture of a convocation, a very brief convocation. We've already had a big convocation at the mountain. We've had a kind of rupture moment in the golden calf. And I suppose we could talk about the chronology of all of this. So where exactly do we want to wade in? I'm going to say, I want to give us a picture, a nice I'm going to be a congregational rabbi here and give a congregational picture. Forgive me for projecting here. Moses is standing up at the bima, and Moses is being a rabbi. And Moses is speaking in front of a congregation of people, and he's saying, keep Shabbos, which is
I want to offer a slightly different interpretation. My senior sermon advisor, Rabbi Saul Teplitsky Zal, said a sermon should be marching orders. People should want to get up and do something when you're done talking. Not throw anything, but get up and do something. And so what I find so striking here is that it says la'asot otam, you're supposed to la'asot Shabbat, which I think most of us normally understand to be make Shabbat or to do Shabbat. But it can only be done b'chol moshvotehem, in your dwelling places. And one of the things that separates Shabbat, I think, from the biblical conception of the holidays is that Shabbat was not just a temple observance. It was meant to be observed everywhere, which is why we have this one commandment about not transferring or creating the fire on Shabbat. And Shabbat requires a community. And the reason then Moses gathers everyone is to make this first Shabbat as the community of Bnei Israel.
So
And think about how grand that would be because everyone is there.
I'm listening to you. I'm thinking, I have to plan a trip to Ottawa, and where I'm going, there aren't too many shuls around. And what does it mean to make Shabbat? And many of us have made Shabbat plenty of times, by ourselves, away from people. And it's an interesting experience to have a private Shabbat. Look, we had from 2020, March 2020 to I don't know, we started inching back to normalcy. Nothing was normal between March and June of 2020. I had plenty of private Shabbatot. We were online, Kabbalat Shabbat, and at other times we were online together. But it was, I have to say, I admit, it was quite nice, actually.
Don't tell anybody that you feel that
Don't
way.
tell anybody. But I missed everybody. But it was not bad.
It was quiet.
Go ahead.
I would just make a couple of observations about this first passage and the mitzvah of Shabbat. First of all, a traditional way of reading this fact that there's the emphasis on Shabbat. Just again, our faithful readers and listeners know that we're in this long sweep. The final third of the book of Exodus is mostly about the tabernacle. In Truma and Tetzaveh, they get the instructions of how to build the tabernacle. In the first maybe 33% of Ki Tisa, they get the instructions about how to build their tabernacle and the artist Betzalel and Oholiab and what they're going to do. And then now in Vayakhel and Pekudei, we're actually going to execute it, interrupted in the middle by the golden calf. So one of the things that I think is, one of the traditional ways we have of reading this almost aside about be sure you keep Shabbat is that even though this work is incredibly important, it's incredibly, important to the journey of Am Yisrael. It is a huge, gigantic affirmation of the human capacity to be a partner with God in making holy space. By the way, there's something even more important than what you can accomplish. It's your rest. It's your pattern of ceasing from melacha. Interesting. It's Sheshet Yamim Te'aseh melacha. It's 6 days. Work shall be done. Sometimes it seems like the point is to affirm that you have to work to successfully be a partner. And here it's the passive voice. Work shall be done for 6 days a week, but you really have to attain rest, Shabbaton, here on the seventh day. And so, get a little bit of a perspective here on how important it is that you build all this temple stuff. The other thing I was going to say is, or actually maybe even two more things, but Shabbos, so important in the Torah. We get, remember to keep Shabbat and remember that violations of Shabbat carry the death penalty. And even if you just gather sticks, you might have the death penalty. And the actual details in the Torah of what constitutes rest on Shabbat are incredibly scanty. There's not a lot of details, but here's one of them. Lo tevaru eish b'chol moshvotechem. There's no fire. Okay? So in all the things that the Torah might say about, no tearing toilet paper, no writing, all these, no emails. It's fire, and by implication from Exodus 12, cooking, and Jeremiah goes on about no carrying in and out of the city. Moses says back there in Exodus 14 or 15 or so, I guess 16, no gathering manna. Somehow that's a violation, but we don't have a ton of Shabbos detail, except this one is important. Lo tiva'aru esh, no fire.
So I would just add something here that, there is Heschel's arresting phrase about Shabbat being a palace in time, but this Parsha asks us to regard Shabbat as a Mishkan in time. And that's why we have them come together. And the reason why I think this is so incredibly important is that we're used to thinking of either holy time or holy space, and the Torah is trying to get us to think about both at the same time. that we have to invest our holy space with holy time, but we also have to find our holy time in a holy space. And the curiosity is, it seems that the central commandment of Shabbat is that you, the second person, should do no work. Because we know from later descriptions that all of this work that we cannot do during the week is work that will actually be done on Shabbat in the Mishkan. And it's useful to think about the point and the counterpoint here, that we're looking for this kind of unity, which generally we only ascribe to God, but Shabbat holds out the hope for us that we can actually achieve this unity ourselves in this world.
You know, it just so happens that in a Talmudic passage that I've been learning from the Tractate Sanhedrin, they have this very extensive series of kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer is a Talmudic technique of reasoning. We say, if this minor thing is true, how much more is this other more serious thing likely to be true? Or if this thing is permitted, how much, how much more likely is this other minor thing to be permitted? And one of the things that they take up with is the question of, could there be judicial death penalties executed on Shabbat? Could you put a criminal to death on Shabbat? And a decisive piece of the argument is this verse, Lo tevaru eish b'chol moshvotechem, that somehow the word fire, moshvotechem, your dwelling places, connotes for them the location of a judicial system in a court, and you should not, quote, burn fire, meaning, even if you had to execute somebody via that methodology. But as Barry just alluded to, it's somewhat counterintuitive. You might think that since we're not supposed to do all these things on Shabbat, you're not supposed to cook, you're not supposed to burn, you're not supposed to ignite, you're not supposed to kill, yet all those things do happen in the sacrificial system on Shabbat. There's still morning and afternoon sacrifices, there's a musaf of Shabbat, and all those things involved in the temple ritual, things which you would ordinarily think would not happen on Shabbat, and yet they do supersede Shabbat.
So is the temple has a different status as a sacred space within which these rules are suspended or are applied differently? How would you?
I think you use an interesting phrase, like, are the rules suspended? So let's I mean, this is like basic Shabbat legislation nowadays. Would you say that in the event of this may be an academic distinction of no real import, but would you say that in a life-saving situation, Shabbat rules are suspended, or would you say that the nature of Shabbat rules is that they don't apply in life? Is it like, the rules are still in force, but we're going to violate them now? Or a full understanding of the rules means that you understand that they are less decisive than a life-saving situation? I mean, maybe that's just,
obviously, I think in both ways, but when it comes to, at the moment, I and we've all had situations, emergency situations where we've had to make a decision of what to do on Shabbat. And in my head, I'll use the first language. I'll say it's suspended now. I can't operate under these rules now because I have a higher priority now, which is to get my kid to the hospital. I mean, that's a case in point, right? So, and my obligation is to get my kid to the hospital. My obligation is, to save life or to bring healing or to, alleviate this kind of suffering in the broadest sense possible. And therefore my Shabbat is suspended. And I literally think in these terms until such time as I can reinstate Shabbat, if I'm able to. So I'll get to, these are case in point. I had to go to the hospital, get the stitches in, and had to come back, and then Shabbat starts again. Shabbat has reinstated. So for me, that's how it works. And I can totally understand how someone could create a different framework and say, look, I'm operating in the Chai Bahem framework, you shall live by them framework. And that's the mitzvah I'm fulfilling now. And that mitzvah will always, Pikuach Nefesh will always
Yeah.
Shabbat,
Yeah.
Right,
I
but
find that this, again, it's an academic distinction in terms of its practical effect. I do find that second one conceptually clean. So our listeners might like to know that there's a halachic principle called ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min hamitzvah. If you are in the midst of doing a commandment that is like really pressing and present at the moment, um, that fact would supersede other mitzvah obligations, and the locus classicus, the super duper example for that is that if you've lost a family member and you chas v'chalila, you've lost your parent or something, um, until that person is buried, you don't have any other mitzvah. You are just supposed to be focused on the superseding mitzvah of giving your loved one a decent burial. And I would think that, that's kind of how I think about this Shabbat passage. You are commanded, we are all commanded to build this Mishkan, Betzalel, Ohaliab, all the stuff, all the accoutrements, the gold and silver, Tchelet, Vargaman, the purple and the blue and the crimson. Oh, but there's another mitzvah has come along and should occupy your attention, and that's Shabbat.
I want to suggest a slightly different conceptual approach here. And I think sacrifice is in a different category altogether, because the way that the sacrificial system works is sacrifices must be brought every single day. They don't suspend the rules of Shabbat. They, in fact, are the ikar, because I think in the biblical conception and the early rabbinic conception, the world could not exist without the sacrificial system. And I think what it testifies is to a conception of the eternality of the relationship between God and Israel, that God must be worshipped the same way every single day. And that is through sacrifice. That is the way I think our ancestors conceived the world to be best operating.
So
For sure it's true that the Torah is explicit. Ubayom HaShabbat shnei chebasim.
yeah.
On Shabbat, you're supposed to offer 2 lambs. And there's no way to read Numbers 28 without understanding that on Shabbat there are special sacrifices that are supposed to happen.
Well, what you could do is skip that passage.
Okay. Well, let's skip over to another passage here and think, since we are in the temple, let's talk about the people who made the mobile temple, the sanctuary. And once again, we're reintroduced to the 2 principal 4 men of the Mishkan, and one is Betzalel, and the other is Oliab ben Achisamach. But I want to refer to the way that Betzalel is described, and this was also mentioned in last week's parsha, but we didn't focus on it. So the text says in chapter 35, beginning verse 30, Re'u kara Adonai b'shem Betzalel. I have called by name Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur l'matei Yehuda, and we talked about his lineage. Then beautiful. Here I want to kind of linger in this lovely verse. Vayimale oto ruach Elohim. God filled him up, right? It's like he inspired him, right?
Literally.
He literally inspired. He fills them up. He fills up his lungs, ruach, with wind, with the divine wind, spirit. Bechokma, bituna, uvedat. And these words are very difficult to interpret or translate, but we'll call it wisdom, understanding, knowledge, uvechom lacha, and all of the manner of working. So here's an exceptional person who has spirit and who has different facets of knowledge, and we would call that an artist, I guess. And some people are like that, some people are not. I can easily vouch for myself that I just do not have the talent to draw or to paint or to illustrate. I know how to do technical drawing from grade 10 in Woodruff High School. I had a class in commercial technical drawing, so I know how to use a ruler and a pencil. Okay, and I know what orthographic drawing is, uh, um, but this is something that is, I don't want to say I envy people who are, but I would say it's extraordinary. We admire the talent, and our understanding of talent is that it's a gift. And this applies not only in the plastic arts, but I guess it would apply to everything. And we could talk about music as well. People who are able to unlike anybody else, fashion a melody or put words to a melody, and make art in a way that as many of us understand and listen, it changes our lives, it changes the world. I just want you to think about that, and talk about the distinctiveness of a character who has been endowed with different facets of knowledge from most of us. And if you have any people in mind for this in any world of art possible, go ahead.
Well, we were talking before we started recording, and you had some interesting thoughts about the different knowledge words.
Yeah. So
Chokhmah, Chokhmah tuvuna or dat, Chokhmah bina v'dat is a different way of saying these same words. Tivuna, you see the bina in there, and that's the acronym that gives Chabad Hasidut its
So
name.
I'll just go with that. I'm going to follow, the commentator Reggio, which I used in my class this week. But it's Chokhmah seemed to be like a skills set. It seems like this remarkable ability to use to have technique. Bina Tuna was a more intuitive knowledge. That is to say, I understand what you're saying. You use a word here, and it conveys to me a certain idea, and I translate that idea into color or into shape or into whatever the art is. Okay, and then there's da'at, which is the deeper knowledge, the meaning of it, the interaction, the narrative of it. So I'm on a different level when I understand. Chachma is skill sets. Tuna, bina, understanding, is the kind of intuitive sense, and da'at is the deeper narrative sense, I think, is what we're saying here. And these are different facets of the world of the artist. And I would want you to think about that. I mean, think about the different kinds of. I mean, you all are familiar with people in your communities, whatever, who have unique skills. We certainly had experience of that at camp with individuals who were quite talented, quite remarkable, both in music and in art and in drama and in presentation and choreography, etc. I mean, and they do see the world differently, and they're able to do amazing things with that.
I just a small side observation in these parshiot. I'm a big lover of the Israeli writer Shai Agnon, and Agnon, whose original name, his last name was Chachkes, took on this pen name Agnon. His first great literary success was in a story called Agunot, a lovelorn story about a girl, Dina, in Jerusalem. Her father has brought from Europe this great Talmid Chacham, Eliezer, to marry her. But the truth is that Eliezer is longing for a girl back in Poland, and Dina doesn't really want him either. What she wants is this character whose name is Ben Uri, who is building the most beautiful ark in celebrating of her wedding. Ben Uri the character is not named Betzalel, but Betzalel Ben Uri.
Ben Uri.
And he is just, you kind of tell that Agnon, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think you kind of tell that Agnon is identified with Ben Uri because he is the artist, and the writer is the artist, the visual artist, or the ark, the carpenter and the woodworker and the visual artist who builds the ark you sense that there's like a connection with the artist writer, and in the end, Dina throws in a kind of a misplaced rage. She destroys the ark and throws it out of a window and breaks it. And that becomes the symbol of the fact that she ultimately gets divorced from the husband, who then goes back to Poland. And they are all the characters are agunot. They are all lovelorn and abandoned. None of the men have any of the women, and the artist's creation is destroyed. It's tragedy. It's like a heartbreaking, tragic story. This is, that's a kind of a modern riff on this piece of successful art. The broken art in the modern writer, standing beside the realized story here in the Torah.
Yet, I mean, if you look at the Agno story, I mean, what did he do? He created a piece of art out of the broken lives of individuals. I mean, and that's kind of like
someone had to make a success out of it.
Well, no, what you're saying is there's the story writer as craft, right? And with story writing, there is craft. Of course there is. I mean, there's craft in simply putting a sentence together, a good sentence together. And
well, we know what the bad sentence is called.
Exactly.
It's
I mean,
close to craft, but with a P.
Craft?
So, when you began talking, Elliot, you reminded me a number of athletes who, after their championship has been earned, they thank God or some other facsimile. And it sometimes seems off-putting, but I think actually it fits in very well with our discussion here, because what they're saying is that what they accomplished was with the help of God, because God inspired them, to use the language that you used before. And, there's a fascinating statement in the Talmud that the greater reward is for the one who is commanded and does than for the one who is not commanded, which is understood in a lot of different ways. But I think for our purposes, what it means is that the one who acknowledges that the source of their art or their craft is God is more worthy, shall we say, than the one who thinks it's all internal, that the individual is the one who is responsible without any external help. And whether we believe in God, which I think for us is rather obvious as rabbis, although perhaps not in 2024, or we acknowledge some other way of recognizing there is something outside of us that in some way shapes us, we can understand almost the need to have some element of the divine in the artistic process.
So people would say that the artist is simply a vessel, that something is speaking through it.
Well, more than a vessel, because I think that I was thinking earlier, it's like someone who fulfills his or her destiny. That's the artist. It comes from God, but the person actually has to do what is necessary for the art to come into being, as opposed to someone who simply thinks he or she is charting his or her own course.
Okay, so if I give you the question here, to be the artist, right? If you're the dramatist, or the story writer here, and creating the character of Betzalel, and try and ask him to explain to us what is it that he experiences, and how would he explain to us his ability here, and of course this unique privilege of fashioning all of these important things. It's like he has the supreme honor of shaping the worship life of Israel. He's the one that, and is there any kind of curlicue on any of does he have a signature? Does he have a place where he puts his identity? Does he put his own mark on anything? I mean, that may be a very modern idea, although going back, I mean, there are lots of ways that artists really put themselves in the work here.
He writes Nina in small letters somewhere. I think that what Betzalel says, he has been infused with a sense or the radiance of the divine, and in that act or in that event, his task was created that he now had to go and do.
But he's all,
So
yeah, he's got to solve problems all the time, like all our,
exactly, because being infused with a sense of the divine is the beginning, not the end.
yeah.
And the art, whatever it is, you mentioned writing, and as one of them is at the end of the process.
Right. Again,
So
there's,
the artist is necessary and creates his or her art out of the fullness of one's individuality, but it cannot be done without God.
it's there needs to be a technical element to it, right?
Yes.
Like the skaters who get, their marks for technical skill and artistic interpretation, right? And you need to have the technical skill. And with that, I'm thinking like, so Chachma, Tuna, and Bina, Chachma, Tuna, and Dat, you know, we start out with a technical skill because he's got to be able to solve problems. He's got to be able to lachashov machshavot. He's got to be able to think the thoughts, but he's also got to be able to kind of translate what is being said here in the plan and to objects. And that's a skill that most of us don't have, I suppose. But people who are involved in the world of space and objects, they do have that skill, and it's a remarkable skill to have. It's a remarkable, yeah. And so here we are, the art of the Parsha, the art of Parsha Talk. We're coming to the completion of this, you know, um, and it will tell us the different dimensions of things, the descriptions of things. I think I want to say in conclusion that there's a certain joy in this. We look at these parshiot and see them sometimes as tedium, but there is a song here.
Oh, for sure. I just another of those categories of halachic categories that make things make sense is hidur mitzvah, making it beautiful. And I think a lot of times we just think about things as functional. The aesthetics of Jewish life, obviously we have them. We don't have Notre Dame. We don't
Well,
have,
that was burned anyway, so
thank heavens, we would have had fire insurance, I know, but we don't have the Michelangelo, and we don't have the Pietà and the Sistine Chapel. We are in some respects a dressed down.
We have
Um,
Psalm 23, okay?
we are our words. This is a word tradition more than a few years ago there was a exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum about Jerusalem and the three different faiths, and everything that was about Judaism was about books.
Yeah.
It was clothes and food, but Judaism was just about books, which is fine. But I do think that this parsha, these parshiot, and the character of Betzalel and Ohaliav, should give us a little bit of juice about the aesthetic dimension of life, and the fact that these characters, make these objects and accoutrements, and the Techele Vargaman, Talat Shani Vishesh Vizim, and all the woven threads and the gold and the silver and the bronze and the glinting and the radiant. You should come away and say that, the artists among these things they do is they just make it beautiful, and
And that,
our literature is beautiful, but it would be also good that when you go in the room, you're kind of dazzled.
yeah, and I think
so
that's the story. That's the story that it's telling here. Go ahead, last word.
what I would add is that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, is art in service to God. And it's interesting, Jeremy, the things that you mentioned, the Pietà, the Sistine Chapel, are from Michelangelo's religious art, because he too was an artist in service to God. And I think the medium is different. The Mishkan is not the same as the Sistine Chapel or the Pietà, but one can dedicate oneself within the Jewish tradition to art in the service in service to God. And
Well,
parenthetically, we might say that I think, at least for me, perhaps the reason why Michelangelo seems the greater artist than Picasso is because of the overt religious emphasis in Michelangelo's great works.
Yes,
It does seem that there's a real spiritual grandeur. And, you know, as long as I mentioned the halachic concept of Hidur Mitzvah, making it beautiful, you know, there's a kind of a rule of thumb that you should spend about 25 or 30% more on a beautiful talit or a beautiful you know, etrog or something like that, but not like 200%. So it's a halachic way of saying, you know, you should start with the kosher object that meets the religious needs, and then add another 25 or 33%. But don't go crazy. You don't need the gold-plated, you know, you literally can't have the gold-plated tefillin. They have to be just black leather, but you don't need the gold-plated hoo-ha version. But you do, within the range of normal human experience, want to make this as beautiful as you can, because it's not ordinary. I mean, this, I guess part of what I'm getting at about Kiddusha, about holiness, is the intense specialness of it, not the just ordinary run-of-the-millness of it.
Well, that, I think, you know, the conversation on Torah is the art too, and the parshanut is the literature, the art of parshanut, the art of interpretation, and of course the discussion as well. And that's why our Parasha Talk is artful as well. We enjoy it, and we enjoy having our viewers and listeners with us. We thank you for spending the time with us, thinking and praying for the hostages and all who are affected. And we want to wish everyone a beautiful Shabbat, and that we will see you all again next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.